The Mafia is one of those criminal organisations that over the years has managed to expand its power and have a profound international impact. Its rules, its modus operandi and its characters have impressed and fascinated many directors, producers and screenwriters who've brought to the cinema a series of movies that would later become real cults. Inaugurating the golden age of the gangster movie. The Godfather, Scarface, Goodfellas and Casino, not to mention Italian productions such as The Day of the Owl, Romanzo Criminale and the recent Gomorrah. And they've all greatly influenced audiences around the world, helping to create a stereotype in the common imagination of the Mafia and mobsters of a certain type. But how strong is the impact of the movies and what does it entail? Does it create a false and dangerous image that doesn't allow us to see criminal organisations for what they really are? Or does it provide the opportunity to deepen certain themes and to establish interesting debates? What's the reason for the success of the gangster genre in the movie industry? The cinematographic genre known as gangster movies originated in the period between the two great wars, and more precisely in the 1930s. And for a decade, the organised underworld, especially the one of Italian origin, had made its way thanks to prohibition, and had increased its power so much so that it appeared frequently in the newspapers. Events and personalities far from the common way of life had influenced Hollywood, which began to churn out a series of interesting and successful films. In particular, it was Warner Brothers that set up a precise structure that was then reproposed by many other movie producers. Charismatic and talented criminals of the slums who managed to make the social climb in the world of crime, turning themselves into businessmen who live in luxury. Usually the movies end with the sudden and dizzying fall of the main character, who ends up either killed or disappears into oblivion. This type of narrative immediately struck not only the American public but also the viewers in every corner of the world, which appreciated a series of elements that have decreed the success of this movie genre. We always start with the main character, who, despite being a negative figure, thanks to his charm, his intelligence, his sense of honour and his taste, manages to conquer the viewers. And since the 1970s, then the various characters in these films have been played by famous and brilliant actors who have contributed to creating this myth. The expressions, the language and the same clothes used to shoot these cult movies have become, over time, elements capable of creating a stereotype of the mobster that has survived a long time. In a nutshell, the gangster movie managed to shake up the American and international film world, offering a fresh and different narrative from the one proposed in the previous decades. And this has ensured the triumph of this type of movie. But today, things have changed, especially in the United States. The genre has lost much of its luster because audiences are more aware of the injustices reported by the films. In fact, if at one time organised crime was thought of as something distant and films were considered for their fictional elements, the recognition by institutions of certain types of crime and the birth of numerous associations that fight injustice have helped to see things with a more critical eye. The progress of society has then led to give greater value to female figures, of course always very passive characters in the traditional gangster movies, and to condemn the patriarchal mentality present in such films. Perhaps it's precisely these reasons that have decreed the slow decline of this type of fiction, as evidenced by the recent feature film The Irishman, which wasn't a great success amongst the broad public. The same cannot be said of the Italian filmography nowadays, which seems to have followed an inverse process, both in terms of characterisation and audience appreciation. In fact, in recent years in Italy, there has been an increasing demand for mafia-themed films and TV series. It's a sort of golden age of the crime stories. Hollywood has, since the beginning, decided to represent a glamorous version of the Italian-American mafia, made of luxury, expensive cars, designer clothes, beautiful women, and in general, a very over-the-top lifestyle. Even the main characters, criminals and therefore essentially negative figures, were always very warm figures that the audience were led to sympathise with and, of course, like. The story of the man was told as well as that of the mafioso. Italian productions dedicated to the theme of mafia, especially Cosa Nostra, have always been structured in a practically opposite way. The criminal organisation is the absolute evil, and the characters that represent it lack any fascinating and positive characteristics. Almost secondary figures that give the spectator little emotion and serve only as comparison in order to highlight the features of the main character. Of course, not all movies are like this. On the contrary, those that remain most impressive reveal a brutal mafia devoid of humanity, but not at all weak and frail, but so powerful as to infiltrate even the major state institutions. The 1984 TV series La Piovra is a prime example and can be defined as a mirror of the criminal situation in Italian society at that time. In a nutshell, the exalted and deified characters were rightly those who were on the side of the law. Commissioners, carabinieri, judges were figures much better appreciated by the public, and with whom one could easily identify. They were the characters the public were rooting for. Perhaps the different path taken by Italian productions compared to American ones is due to the social and cultural context of the two countries. In fact, the mafia phenomenon is much stronger and continues to be so in Italy, more so than in the United States, where the Cosa Nostra is on the verge of a slow decline, cornered by new forms of criminal organisations. The strange fact is that since the early 2000s, several Italian directors have begun to do something different, to make criminals the protagonists, turning them into tragic and violent, but extremely fascinating anti-heroes. And a large part of the audience appreciated it, as shown by the great success of Romanzo Criminale and Gomorrah. Of course, this type of narrative hasn't been welcomed by everyone because it's unfair and dangerous to exalt a type of negative character that is not part of fantasy but is all too real. But the humanity of the mafia represented on film, its contradictions, the brutality that mixes with affection and sense of honour, if conveyed to the public in a serious and effective way, can instead make people think. After all, when the characters are well characterised, they're closer and become a tool to raise awareness about organised crime. Movies are an important tool for raising awareness, especially amongst young people. Films dealing with the mafia can help to discover and understand a phenomenon still partly ignored in a simple and accessible way. And for this reason, many schools in Italy take steps every year to propose ad hoc programmes that allow the viewing of a series of films on the subject, and a subsequent reflection and possible debate. Mafia and cinema have been interconnected for decades. Films can entertain or raise awareness. They can be educational tools or just simple distractions. But it's up to us to seize the opportunities that they provide and use them to the fullest. So, an interesting reflection of organised crime in the cinema, and I'm sure food for thought, particularly in the context of some of the key characters whose stories that we've covered in many of our other videos. And of course, please do check those out to hear what the real characters are like in comparison to the movies. But that's all for today, guys. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, please do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We do read them and we do appreciate them. Until next time, take care.